look down, you'll always be a slave. Look down, you're standing in your grave. If you've ever read Les Miserables or seen the show, you know that the very first scene in the play comes from the French prison where you meet prisoner 24601. He's in prison because he's stolen a loaf of bread because his sister's child was starving. He's trying to feed her. And then he tries to escape. When we meet him and all the other slave prisoners, 24601, Jean Valjean is granted his pardon, his freedom. He gets his badge designated that his time is up, that he must wear. And when he meets Javert, the lawman, God-fearing lawman, he says, "Do you know what this means, 24601?" He says, "Yes, it means I'm free." He says, "No. You'll always be a slave to the law, a lawbreaker, a thief." And he goes through the reasons why he was sentenced and that he's sure he'll see him again. The play and the book powerfully go through the human condition of life and cruelty, of how we treat each other, of how life sometimes knocks the wind out of our sails, and then how does our faith, whether it's regimented in black and white like Javert, or it's this winding, twisting of roads of falling away and coming back like Jean Valjean, trying to reconcile when our experiences are not the same from our faith readings and what we experience in life, and they sometimes collide, and we're forced to struggle with, what does life mean to me, and where is God in this moment? Who is God to me now? When I read this text from Ezekiel the prophet, and God takes him on this vision, this dream quest, whatever it is, he leads them to this valley, and the Hebrew text describes this valley of death, of dry bones, the fallen slain of Israel. And we remember the context of this vision as we read things like Psalm 137, "By the waters of Babylon, as we've been exiled, as our people have been taken from by chain through their noses in exile, deported from the land of Israel, Jerusalem has been razed to the ground. All the walls that once protected them are nothing. The temple is destroyed, and the people weep by the rivers of Babylon." It says, "As our captors demand, we sing songs of joy, songs of old, songs of our youth from Jerusalem, and we say, our tongues stick to the roof of our mouths. We have hung up our lyre and our harp, and we don't want to play them anymore because you've taken everything from us." And it reads in one of the most difficult things, happy are those who will dash your children against the rocks and kill them like you did to us, because they were too much baggage to make as you deported our able-bodied people away from our land. As I think about this text, I think about God's question to Ezekiel: can what has been written off as dead be brought back to life again, prophet, son of man? My very first thought when reading the text was of Ryan Shazier. He was a linebacker for Ohio State and then played for Pittsburgh Steelers, and he was hit on the field, much like Mike Utley, if you watched the Thanksgiving game decades ago with the Detroit Lions. Both these men were, in the sporting world, gods. They were at the top of the pro sporting world in the NFL, playing a game that, we play as kids, but we're paid crazy money and physical fitness beyond any shadow of a doubt. And now they were both paralyzed on the field and didn't know if they ever stand again. And it got me to thinking, can these bones live again? About those who have suffered physical, rug swept out from underneath you, a car wreck, debilitating arthritis, Parkinson's, a terminal illness or chronic illness. What was and now what is? Can these bones have life again in a physical way? I thought this morning, as I was practicing this sermon, about the people of Fork Hills, Mississippi. 2 days ago, life was going on as normal. Today, houses that were once standing are now splintered like toothpicks. 25 dead. A community, a town that once existed on a map, completely destroyed. Looking around in the debris and wreckage of what was once lives put together, now can this community, can these bones have life again? I think about a church, our church in particular, because, hey, it's my current context. And I think about over the last couple of years, church members who remember a time when there were 100 kids coming forward for children's message, where the choir was full and there was an orchestra to go with them. And they went on tour to Europe and we were building Christian education wings, and now we're pandemicked. There's all kinds of political division and fighting and infighting and battles for equality and dignity and climate change and inflation through the teeth, wherever these things are hitting you in your day-to-day life and the struggles therein, and thinking, can the church come back? Do these bones live again? And if so, how so? As we come back from what was just a few years ago an empty sanctuary and virtual church. Maybe on a lighter note, you think of Fairleigh Dickinson, number 16 seed. You guys got no chance. Sorry, Purdue. I'm sorry. John, I apologize. Smallest team in the tournament against the tallest team in the tournament. You got no chance, no shot, forget it. How many times have you felt so overwhelmed, maybe individually or as you look at the future? Whatever the things that are hitting you hard in your life. The people of Israel had been through the ringer. Everybody that was a person of leadership, a person of power, had been taken away. Now, never mind you, the poor folks are still there. It's often interesting how stories are written. They're left there on the land. It's not like Israel's completely empty. But those who have been taken remember, and they're dejected. So God says to Ezekiel the prophet, basically prophesy to an empty room, to these bones. There's nothing here, God. Speak to these bones. Do you think they can live again? And I'd really like to hear how Ezekiel spoke back. You know, it says, only you know, God. Was he like, yeah, it's up to you, God. I mean, I'm not a chance in my book. Or was he like, it all depends on you, because without you, there's not a shot. You know what we've been through. I think about context. I think about what this text would sound like to the people of Pine Ridge Reservation, where the unemployment is 80%. And today, in 2023, the life expectancy, 52 for a woman, 49 for a man, here in the United States, a first nation within a nation. Still wondering if the land will be given back, the Black Hills the gold was discovered. Hey, it belonged to the Lakota, but we discovered gold. Well, we'll just borrow it for a while, but we never give it back. How much culture and life was lost. I wonder what it would hear like to people living in Bakhmut, Ukraine, as they look around at bodies of neighbors and shelling every day. Can these bones have life again? See, it matters what you're going through or what you've been through and how you hear it, right? What does this mean, God? And it's interesting because God tells the prophet, I will breathe life into these bones, and I'll put on them then the order. I'll breathe life into them, and then I'll put on them sinews and tendons and flesh. But that's not what actually happens, and it's not by accident, I would argue. As Ezekiel starts to prophesy to the bones, they come back. And if you were a kid in Sunday school, them bones, dry bones, knee bones connected. Anyway, anybody? Yeah, all right. We'll sing it at the end. No. But it's powerful to me because the bones come back with the flesh, but they're just standing there, inanimate bodies. And again, I say it's not by accident because I feel like we can be in a moment, we can exist in a moment, flesh and blood, but there still not be any life in us. And God says, speak again to the bones and speak to the breath. And there's 14 times God's breath is mentioned in 10 verses. Think it's important? The breath of God, the Spirit of God. Without the Spirit of God moving through us, we're just being. Go through the daily motions. But the Spirit has the power to bring us back, to bring meaning back, to bring hope back. It's a powerful thing when God is allowed to work. Now, there's also a shadow side of this text, I would argue. It says, this out of the soil, this flesh and blood will rise. And as I was reading the text and listening to some commentary on the text, a professor from Fuller University out in the Pacific West in California spoke about that out of flesh and blood, out of the soil, sounds an awful lot like my flesh and blood, soil and blood. It sounds a lot like a Third Reich slogan, an ethnocentric slogan. You are bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, and I will do whatever it takes to come back as a nation, to become great again, even if it's at the expense of some of the foreigners who live amongst Israel. That record's been played throughout history many times. And again, the commentator notes it's important, especially, hey, you think this is about Israel 2,000 years ago. Ever see any Christian nationalism in the United States in 2020, 2023? Where, above all cost, America in the Bible, no matter who it hurts or who's left out. Yeah, that shadow side of this text matters. But in that moment, it's again not about flesh and blood. It's not about us and our power alone. It is about the Spirit. And that's why Ezekiel kept coming back to it. The Spirit runs through this place that seems bereft of hope, bereft of anything that's good. And God says, speak. Speak where there's nothing going on. Speak where it feels empty. Speak where it feels hopeless. Speak where it feels dead. And as a friend of mine who went to school with me in undergrad used to say, Jesus didn't come back to make decent people good. Jesus came back to make dead people alive. It's a resurrection. It's an Easter text in many ways. A God of life. A God of power. A God who says, don't ever give up. And the thing that strikes me so powerfully about this text is that these bones that were dead and buried, at the end of the text, are alive and risen, full of life. So if you don't take anything away from this sermon, take away this. Nothing that is buried on God's watch stays dead. Ever. God always has the last word. That's why whenever we have a memorial service in this church, it's not a goodbye, and it's not a dead hard stop in sadness. It is in this house is life. And this isn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. Amen? Amen. Amen.